some 30 years to talk about this, so I give permission to be recorded. Feel free to pull out and record me. This is a public park. I'm asking my friends to record me. Good evening. My name is Heather McMeekan. I've lived here since 1986. I share openly to combat stigma and because I hope to encourage others to speak out. I also live with PTSD and dissociative identity disorder. Almost 30 years and hundreds of co-pays later, I'm hoping that by sharing part of my journey, perhaps someone else will not have to share my experience, although I know a lot of you have. For that, I'm sorry. It took me all these years to talk about this for several reasons. My abuser is one of several that I've had throughout my life, and multiple childhood traumas require a long period of healing. Also, speaking one's truth up here is a privilege which requires supportive friends, a safe job, preferably one with union membership, the ability to withstand the onslaught of character assassination and flat-out lies sure to come afterwards, and the ability to speak without becoming re-traumatized and destabilized, as happens with many trauma survivors. Also, because my kids are finally old enough now that they can process this. I wasn't going to put myself through this, as it makes my PTSD symptoms really rough for several days afterward. But my abuser is still abusing women in this community, including WIU students, and I am just done being silent about it. In the 90s, I was in my early 20s, and I was working here as a paramedic, teaching full-time over at the university as an EMS instructor, and working a lot of hours. The system I worked in was really large and quite different in the days before 911. There were a few other women working in EMS, and most weren't treated well. Several police officers in our county and city felt entitled to use their authority to pull me over and hit me up for dates and sex. Most of them took no for an answer for the first time, which is fine, except they shouldn't have pulled me over. But not all of them. It was frustrating and dehumanizing to be treated like I was just an object, and frightening, and because they were armed and had all the power. But as I had to work with these guys, I smiled and got through those interactions without giving into the pressure as good as I could. But it was not okay. And I didn't know who to talk to. My mom had died when I was in college, and unfortunately, though I loved him, my father was an abusive, violent alcoholic. Now, I'm going to give a content warning for gun violence here. My dad made me a gun violence survivor when I was in 3rd grade. His car radio had been stolen that night, so when he was drunk, he decided to grab his guns and do target practice in our basement in Des Plaines. That'd be like if somebody did target practice in their basement down here in downtown Macomb. The neighbors called, he was taken away, but they bonded him out and let him keep all of his guns. Can't let a powerful white man with class privilege get rid of his guns, right? You gotta let him have his toys. I didn't know what to do about that. Sorry, this is hard even after 30 years. I say this because I want people to understand the impact gun violence had on decision making and my decisions. My childhood ended that night. I started living with only one goal, and this is the only goal my sisters and I lived by, and my mother. Do not allow the powerful man with the guns to ever get upset again, because he could end us. Nothing else mattered, not learning how to play, not learning how to get along, how to develop friendships, none of that. It was all keeping the one abusive, violent man happy. People with guns and authority, but without proper control, psychological fitness, transparency, and oversight are a menace to all those in their vicinity. That's not a moral judgment, it's just a fact. There are many people who shouldn't have guns, and we will all be safer when we someday ensure that stops happening. I am very frightened by abusive police officers. It's triggering. Watching so many of them now murdering black folks is enraging and disgusting and all too damn common, and it must end. And it's not going to end till a bunch more people with my skin color care about it. I loved being a paramedic in those first years. I was so excited about having a career and starting a new life away from my abusive family. I really liked transferring patients between facilities and meeting many wonderful human beings from all walks of life and just listening to their stories. But after picking up the bodies of some of my students, remember I was teaching at WIU at the time, I just couldn't do it anymore. The culture and danger and my PTSD from all the meta of it just kind of made me realize I needed to get out to save myself. If it was just about the patient care, I'd probably still be in EMS, but the abusive, unhealthy people and unethical, immoral, and in many cases plain criminal behavior by too many in the profession and in policing around here was just too toxic to deal with constantly. What kind of person thinks an exhausted woman wants to be pulled over and pressured by a sleaze with a badge and a gun? Yet it has not only happened to me, but also several of my students and many of my friends and co-workers. None of our police have been held accountable to this day, to my knowledge. Police literally hold the power of life and death over us. Now, as a white person with white privilege, I wasn't afraid of being murdered by these guys. But I was afraid of being harmed in other ways by these entitled, abusive, powerful men. This is nothing compared to the trauma that black folks and other people of color experience when being pulled over. And I don't mean to imply that I could even begin to understand what y'all are going through, but I see you, and I am sorry, and it's not okay. White women, when we finally all embrace the Black Lives Matter movement as our own and become allies, the same men who prey on us are going to be way easier to hold accountable. So let's all start believing and supporting black victims now, please. One trooper in particular really ruined my joy of being in the outdoors due to his creepy, scary, stalkerish behavior. He'd park in front of my house until I had to leave for work to hit me up for sex. I actually put a second garage door in the back of my garage so I could sneak out on my motorcycle. I just push it out and not start it. And then he couldn't see me from the street, and I could hit out to the back alley and then start it up a pile away. Some of you who have been stalked know what that's like, right? Sorry, I need a breath for a second. Let's see. I put up a fence so he and others couldn't see me from the front. He'd show up at the ER when I'd be working, and he'd be cracking inappropriate comments and embarrassing me, and I'd get looks as if I asked for them or encouraged them. A nurse tipped me off that he would go in and stop and check our work schedule when I wasn't there. I had wondered how he seemed to know when I'd be leaving after dark. He'd follow me and then pull me over and hit on me. I was just tired and wanted to go home, and being a paramedic sometimes is a really hard job. It changed my feelings of safety and value as a woman in this community. It made me fear calling the police for help for anything ever. I tried being unfriendly. I tried dressing sloppy and butch. When I told my boss, he informed me that anything outside the hospital was between me and the guys. I worked with almost all guys. That was helpful. Not. I asked if our schedule could be made private, but he said that was too much trouble and that people didn't like change. Now, with therapy and life skills and just being plain fed up, I promise you I'd be a far more insistent that action be taken. But I didn't have any privilege back then, and I needed that job. And I didn't know how to do any of that. But I was just one of many of the women working there who were going through it from several such abusive men. When it's pervasive, it seems normalized. He pulled me over at Lake Argyle. He pulled me over in front of my friends, causing them to ask me if I was having an affair with him. He showed up to my house and demanded to be let in several times, and I remember thinking, if he manages to push me in and hurts me, nobody's going to believe me. He was married, 8 years older than me. I was single and didn't have any family. I escaped him finally, right, when I got married, and finally verbally stood up for myself in front of my colleagues at work to respond to a really lousy comment he made in front of everybody about my needing a real man. Real men do not abuse power. Mayor Mike Inman. Yes, I am speaking about our current mayor, former state trooper Michael Inman, who once again has been permitted to shamelessly sign the Take Back the Night proclamation, which as a strong feminist, I gotta tell you, has sickened me every damn year, and that's why I haven't come to these events while he's been our mayor. Seeing my abuser up there and being lauded like he's some great, I don't know what. Ugh. Despite being a serial sexual harasser and abuser of power, and he knows it, and so do many who live here, The night before he was going to announce his mayoral candidacy, he came over to my house. I was married then with very small children, both of whom were sick with RSV. And I was exhausted and didn't need to be hassled, but he came by to just ask if I was going to give him trouble. I guess he meant by telling my truth. If I could get this community to do one thing, it would be to have higher standards for the white men we vote into power. I and his other many Me Too's out there have watched this man being supported and defended by women who consider themselves feminist. Abusers cultivate an air of respectability to cover their tracks, and many do fall for it. Mayor Inman was a state trooper armed with a gun and power and authority and cover, and I just wanted to be free to live my life and work, because I finally was starting to have a life after losing my mother and dealing with an abusive dad. But he targeted me, and I had to lead the life of one being stalked, changing my schedule, varying my route, turning off all my lights when I was home and he was at my door. Survivors know the cost of living a hunted existence. You lead a hyper-vigilant life, and it steals all the joy. But even after all these years, he's still racking up victims. Other women, including current WIU students, relate he texts them inappropriately, touches them in ways which make them feel uncomfortable or grossed out, such as when going in for a hug and rubbing their back or playing with their hair. All of these are familiar to me, and I urge you all to report it to the WIU Legal Advocate and the Equal Opportunity Action Office. Abusive public officials have no expectation of privacy. If you ever receive a text or email that's offensive or inappropriate, take a screenshot of that and put the bad behavior on public blast. Public consequences also set a boundary to the other abusers out there. You can file a Freedom of Information Act on these jerks and request the text and then give the results to the press and let them inform the voters. Like most abusive white men, Mayor Inman needs to be held accountable, but he won't be. Inman and his enablers will continue to engage in the character assassination of me and anyone else who dares tell their truth. Have at it. I'm not here for them. I am here for my truth. This was not okay. It traumatized me and caused me to live in fear. And it is an abuse of power. And I'm here for his other victims too. You are not alone. It's okay to speak up. It's not defamation of character when it's true. An abusive parent can impact a household, but a bad cop or politician negatively impacts an entire community. Every time I see my harasser stalker, Mike Inman, at one of his humanitarian proclamation signings, knowing how he's treated and lied about so many of us women and shoved a lot of really talented women out of this community who left because they couldn't stand it, I remain astounded at what this community settles for as so-called leadership. We can do better. Mike Inman behaved as an abusive, entitled, sexually harassing, authoritarian cop.
Yes, he did.
I believe the women who tell me he stalked them as mayor, and I'm here for them, to urge them to get trauma therapy and heal and tell their truths in whatever way you see fit, as all victims deserve to be heard. I urge all community leaders to pay attention to how this man interacts with our young women and take action to protect them. I am immensely grateful for all the courageous victims, survivors, and the many good people who have inspired me and helped me with my healing. Never live with an abuser's secrets to preserve their respectability. Find someone safe to talk to. Our healing is independent of, and thankfully does not require, the validation of community. Though wouldn't it be great to have that? With abusive white men in power especially, we see justice is all too rare. We were not put on this earth to be objects of abuse and control. Seek your healing where you can with those capable of helping you heal. Thank you so much for witnessing for me.
You did a great job, honey. I know my hands are cold.
I'm shaking so